Hey guys, welcome to our take on classic tales in a cyberpunk style. In today's classic, the fog has not lifted since 1886. It has merely changed color. When Robert Louis Stevenson first chronicled the tragedy of Henry Jekyll, he painted a portrait of a man suffocated by the heavy code of Victorian propriety. Jekyll was a prisoner of his own reputation, desperate to divorce his public virtue from his private vices. In the gaslit streets of London, he sought a chemical key to unlock the cage of the soul. Today, we trade gas lamps for neon and carriage wheels for magnetic levitation, but the cage remains. The code and the flesh reimagines this eternal struggle in the context of Neo-London, a world where the singularity is near, but our primal instincts are closer. In this era of corporate omnipotence and transhumanist ambition, the pressure to be optimized is the new propriety. Dr. Jekyll is no longer just a repressed gentleman. He is the ultimate chief executive, a man who views his own conscience as an inefficiency, a bug in the system that must be patched out. The potion is now a protocol. The transformation is no longer magic, but a violent overwriting of the biological hard drive. And Edward Hyde? He is no longer just a beast. He is the glitch. He is the chaotic variable that mathematics cannot predict, the corrupted file that refuses to be deleted. He is the answer to the terrifying question: what happens when we use technology to bypass our humanity? We have built towers of glass and steel to rise above the filth of the streets, but we have carried the mud up with us in our hearts. We have replaced our limbs with chrome, yet the hands that commit violence are driven by the same ancient impulses. This story is not a rejection of the original text, but an update, a new skin for an old ghost. It serves as a warning that while we may upgrade the hardware, the user remains perilously flawed. Welcome to the error log. Welcome to the nightmare. Strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Cyberpunk Reimagined begin now. Chapter 1. The Incident of the Zero Sector. Mr. G, Utter's son, senior auditor of contracts and corporate ethics, was a man of a rugged countenance that was never lighted by a smile. Cold, scanty, and embarrassed in discourse, backward in sentiment, lean, long, dusty, dreary, and yet somehow lovable. In a world where skin was routinely replaced by polymers and eyes by high-resolution optical lenses, Utter's son remained stubbornly organic. He drank synthetic gin when he was alone, to mortify a taste for luxury's sake. And though he was a man of strict rules, he maintained an enviable tolerance for the chaos of others. He used to say, with an analog sigh amidst the city's digital noise, "I let my brother go to the devil in his own way, provided he doesn't violate the terms of service." It was this singularity that made him the last refuge of old acquaintances who had fallen into disgrace, the last backup for corrupted files. His friendship with Richard Enfield, a fixer, an intermediary for submarket data and goods, was an enigma to the elite of Neo-London. Enfield was the opposite: chromatic leather jacket, neural implants visible at the neck, and a smile that sold illusions. Yet, the two maintained the sacred ritual of Sundays. They turned off their comms, blocked augmented reality notifications, and walked the city's lower walkways, where sunlight struggled to pierce the eternal layer of industrial smog. It was on one of these rambles that chance led them down a by-street in District 4, a transition zone between the gleaming corporate spires, high tier, and the toxic sludge of the sprawl, low tier. The street was, by the standards of that sector, clean. Holographic shop fronts projected advertisements for genetic enhancements and brightly colored canned food, trying to hide the decay of the concrete. But there was one exception. 2 stories of a windowless building, a brutalist structure of stained ferro concrete, thrust its way onto the pavement. There was no doorbell, no retina scanner, no welcoming interface. Just a blast door, peeling and marked by faded neon graffiti and laser burn marks. The structure looked like a malignant tumor in the street's commercial architecture. Enfield pointed to the door with his index finger, the tip of which was a universal USB port. "Have you ever remarked that place, Utter's son?" he asked. "It is hard not to notice the silence it emanates," replied Utter's son, adjusting his tortoise-shell glasses, a genuine antique. I have a very unpleasant story connected with that door, said Enfield, his voice dropping an octave, as if fearing the street's audio sensors were listening. Indeed, Utterson stopped, his professional curiosity activated. Of what sort? Trespassing? Hacking? It was about 3 o'clock of a black winter morning, began Enfield. I was coming back from a job at the end of the world where the city lights fail. I was walking through one of those abandoned residential zones, where all you see are endless rows of modular housing units, all dark. Absolute digital silence. I got into that state of induced paranoia where every shadow looks like a security drone. Enfield paused, lighting a blue vapor cigarette. Suddenly, I saw 2 figures. One a little man who was stumping along eastward at a good walk, and the other a girl, a scrap scavenger of maybe 8 or 10, running as hard as she was able down a cross street. Well, sir, the collision was inevitable and horrible. The man trampled calmly over the child's body with the indifference of a war tank crushing glass. He stepped on her and moved on, leaving her screaming on the wet asphalt. It sounds like a small thing to tell, but it was hellish to see. It wasn't like a man. It was like a faulty juggernaut, a massive brute force with no moral code. And then, urged Utterson. I activated my reflex boosters, took to my heels, collared the gentleman, and brought him back. There was already quite a group around the screaming child, some cheap surveillance drones and her family, people from the underground. The man was perfectly cool and made no resistance, but gave me one look, a look so ugly, so charged with a malignant static energy that it brought out the sweat on me like running water. My cooling systems went haywire. Was the girl badly hurt? More frightened than broken, according to the street doc, who showed up, said Enfield. But here is the curious point. I had taken a loathing to my gentleman at first sight. So had the child's family. And the doctor, well, he was one of those illegal butchers, used to sawing off limbs without anesthesia, but every time he looked at my prisoner, I saw the desire to kill rise in his bionic eyes. Enfield inhaled the vapor again, blowing blue rings. We cornered him. We told him we could make such a scandal out of this. We would splash his face across every social feed, tag his biometrics as a predator on every dark web forum. We would destroy his reputation from end to end of Neo-London. And he, asked Utterson. He listened with a metallic coldness, a black, sneering coolness on his lips. He said, if you choose to make capital out of this accident, I'm naturally helpless. Name your price. Classic blackmail, murmured Utterson. We screwed him up to 100,000 credits. An absurd amount for the low tier. He didn't blink. He took us to that door there. Enfield pointed again to the armored structure. Pulled an encrypted key from his pocket, went in, and came back presently. Not with physical cash, of course, but with a bearer transfer chip and a digital check signed with someone else's private key. Utterson raised an eyebrow. Whose? A name I cannot mention aloud here, even with blockers on. But it was a top name, Utterson, one of the high-tier greats. A philanthropist, renowned scientist, board member of Genesis Corp. And was the check valid? Utterson's voice hardened. That was my doubt, exclaimed Enfield. I thought, the guy's a forger or a hacker. No one walks out of a rat hole like that door at 4 in the morning with the digital signature of an industry titan. But he was arrogant. He said, hash test it if you like. We went to the nearest terminal, and the transaction validated. The money was clean. Utterson walked in silence for a few meters, the sound of his real leather boots echoing against the metal of the walkway. You are quite sure he used a legitimate private key? Absolute. I'm a fixer. I know encryption. Enfield shook his head. I call it the blackmail house. An honest and respectable man, paying through the nose for some of the capers of his youth, or perhaps funding something dark to keep his image clean. But even that doesn't explain everything. What do you mean? That place. Enfield thumbed over his shoulder. It isn't a house. It has no connection to the main sewage grid, nor residential fiber optics. Just that door. No one goes in or out but that man, and he only rarely. Enfield, said Utterson, stopping and facing his friend. You never told me the name of the man who walked over the child. Should I? Enfield hesitated, but yielded. The name registered on his biometric ID was Hyde. 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 Utterson repeated the name, tasting metal in his mouth. What sort of a man is he to see? Enfield screwed up his face, trying to process a corrupted image in his memory. He is not easy to describe. There is something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, and yet I scarce know why. He must have some genetic deformity, some compilation error in his DNA. He gives a strong feeling of distortion, but I can't pinpoint where. It's like looking at the uncanny valley come to life. He doesn't look fully rendered. No, sir, I can't explain it. Utterson sighed deeply, looking at the blast door that now seemed to pulse with a silent threat under the strobe light of a soda advertisement. You are sure he used the key of that name you won't say? I'm quite sure. And the name of the account holder? Insisted Utterson, though he already feared the answer. If you insist. Enfield looked around, ensuring no drone was nearby. The digital signature was that of Henry Jekyll. Dr. Jekyll. Utterson closed his eyes. The world around him, the hum, the neon, the acid rain, seemed to spin. He knew Henry Jekyll. More than that, he held Jekyll's digital will on his private server, an encrypted document with disturbing clauses he had never fully understood. Until now, clauses that spoke of the disappearance or unexplained absence of Dr. Jekyll and the total transfer of his administration rights and assets to his friend and benefactor, Edward Hyde. This was no longer just the eccentricity of a wealthy scientist. Enfield's story transformed the document from a whim into a death warrant. Enfield, said Utterson, his voice husky, this is a bad story. For my man, I know the other party. I know the door. That door is the back entrance to Dr. Jekyll's private laboratory, connected to his residence in the main square. Enfield whistled, impressed. Then your blackmail stock has gone up, my friend. If Jekyll is paying to clean up this Hyde's mess, God knows what else Hyde knows about him. Let us make a bargain, said Utterson, extending his unmodified hand. We never refer to this again. Let us delete this conversation from our mental logs. Agreed, said Enfield, shaking the lawyer's hand. Warm skin against cold metal. File deleted. But Utterson knew, as they walked back to the safety of the high-tier lights, that file would never be deleted. That name, Hyde, had installed itself like a virus in his system, and he would not rest until he decrypted the face behind it. The sound of the city swelled around them, but for Utterson, all he could hear was the phantom sound of heavy footsteps crushing something fragile and the silent click of a blast door closing. If you've been following the story this far, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video to help me spread this new way of telling stories. Now, let's go back to the story. Chapter 2. The Search for the Glitch. That evening, Mr. Utterson returned to his bachelor apartment in a high-density residential spire. He ate his nutrient paste without relish and sat down before his secure terminal. With a heavy heart, he accessed his deepest encrypted files and pulled up the digital will of Dr. Henry Jekyll. He had long despised this document. It was not merely a testament. It was a self-executing smart contract. It stated that in the event of Dr. Jekyll's decease, or in case of his verified absence or neurocognitive collapse exceeding 3 months, all his assets, corporate voting rights, and intellectual property were to pass instantly into the hands of his friend and benefactor, Edward Hyde. Furthermore, this Hyde was to assume Jekyll's biometric identity without delay or friction from the system. Before, this document had seemed like the madness of a brilliant mind, an eccentric bug in the code of a great man. Now, after Enfield's story, it read like a pact with a digital devil. It was no longer merely shameful. It was menacing. I thought it was madness, Utterson muttered to the humming server rack in his corner. And now I begin to fear it is disgrace. Unable to rest, he donned his thermal-lined trench coat and ventured out to seek the one man who might hold a decryption key to this mystery, Dr. Lanyon. Lanyon, a hardy, red-faced gentleman with a boisterous laugh and a strict adherence to baseline human biology, lived in Cavendish Square, a zone of old money and minimal augmentation. He welcomed Utterson with open arms, pouring genuine scotch into real glass tumblers. They talked of old times, of the days before the city became a motherboard of neon and crime, until Utterson steered the conversation toward their mutual friend. "I suppose, Lanyon," said Utterson, watching the ice melt in his glass, "that you and I are the two oldest backup files in Henry Jekyll's life?" "I suppose so," Lanyon chuckled, "though we see little of him now. Henry became too theoretical for me. He began to drift into unscientific balderdash. He became obsessed with transcending the limits of the cortex, dabbling in forbidden biomods and volatile neurochemistry. I'm an old-fashioned doctor, Utterson. I believe in healing the flesh, not hacking it until it breaks." We disagreed, and I haven't seen his data signature in months. Utterson let a silence pass before asking the crucial question. "Did you ever come across a protege of his?" "One named Hyde." "Hyde," repeated Lanyon, his brow furrowing. "No, never heard of him. Must be one of Henry's new experimental subjects." Utterson left Lanyon's comfortable analog haven feeling no closer to the truth. The name Hyde continued to haunt him. It became a demon process running in the background of his mind. When he slept, he dreamed of the juggernaut in the alley, crushing the child. When he woke, the curiosity to behold the features of the real Edward Hyde became a burning obsession. He felt that if he could but set eyes on him, the mystery might resolve itself, or at least become bearable. And so began his vigil. Night after night, when the smog descended thickest, Mr. Utterson haunted the narrow street in District 4. He stood in the shadows across from the blast door, his collar turned up, his breath pluming in the freezing chemical air. He watched the rain streak the neon reflections on the pavement. He learned the rhythm of the sector, the heavy tread of private security golems, the skittering of data couriers. Finally, his patience was rewarded. It was a fine, dry night with a biting frost in the air. The street was unusually silent. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the stillness. These were not the heavy, metallic steps of a cyborg, nor the soft tread of a human. They were oddly light, almost frictionless, yet rapid. Utterson stepped out from the shadow of a junction box. The newcomer was small and plainly dressed in a synthetic hooded coat. He was heading straight for the blast door, a keycard already glittering in his hand. Utterson activated his low-light optical enhancement and approached quickly. "Mr. Hyde, I believe." Mr. Hyde shrank back with a hissing intake of breath, like a hydraulic piston decompression. But his fear was momentary. He did not look the lawyer in the face. "That is my name. What do you want?" His voice was husky, and yet it carried a strange resonance, as if modulated through a cheap voice synthesizer. "I see you're going in," returned the lawyer. "I'm an old friend of Dr. Jekyll's, Mr. Utterson of Gaunt Street. You must have heard of me. Seeing you so conveniently, I thought you might admit me." "You will not find Dr. Jekyll. He is offline," replied Mr. Hyde, inserting his keycard into the slot. Then, with a sudden, jarring movement, he turned and angled his face toward Utterson. "How did you know me?" "I will tell you, if you let me see your face clearly." Hyde hesitated. Then, with an air of defiance, he pulled back his hood. The street lamp above flickered, casting a sickly green light upon him. Utterson stared, his internal systems registering a spike of primal adrenaline. Enfield had been right. There was no single, nameable deformity. Hyde was not a cyborg disaster of exposed wires and mismatched chrome. He was superficially organic, but he was profoundly, deeply wrong. His skin had a waxy, poreless sheen, suggesting high-grade synthetic grafting intended to mask something underneath. His movements were too quick, possessing a jerky latency, like a video feed dropping frames. But it was his eyes, dark, glassy, and devoid of rapid eye movement, that were most disturbing. They held a cold, predatory intelligence that felt entirely alien to the human baseline. Looking at Hyde was like looking at the uncanny valley made flesh, a near-perfect simulation of a human that terrified the soul precisely because it was an imitation. He seemed like a glitch in reality, a corrupted file walking in 3 dimensions. "Now I shall know you again," said Utterson, his voice trembling slightly. "It may be useful." "Yes," returned Mr. Hyde. "It is as well we have met. And apropos, you should have my contact ping." He held out a RISCOM unit, allowing Utterson to scan a temporary, encrypted address. Good God, thought Mr. Utterson. Is he thinking of the death of Jekyll already? Is he finalizing the contract? "And now," said the other, "how did you know me?" "By description." "Whose description?" Hyde snarled, his voice dropping into a static growl. "We have common friends," said Utterson. "Common friends? Name them." "Dr. Jekyll, for instance." "He never told you," cried Mr. Hyde, with a sudden access of fury. "I did not think you would have lied to me." "Come," said Mr. Utterson, "that is not fitting language." The other snarled aloud into a savage laugh, and the next moment, with extraordinary quickness, he unlocked the door, slipped inside, and the heavy bolts sealed shut with a pneumatic thud. The lawyer stood a while when Mr. Hyde had left him, the picture of disquietude. Then he began slowly to mount the street, pausing every step or two and putting his hand to his brow like a man in mental perplexity. The problem he was debating as he walked was one of a class that was rarely solved. Mr. Hyde was pale and dwarfish. He gave an impression of deformity without any nameable malformation. He had a displeasing, synthetic smile. He had borne himself to the lawyer with a sort of murderous mixture of timidity and boldness, and he spoke with a husky, whispering, and somewhat broken voice. All these were points against him, but not all of them together could explain the hitherto unknown disgust, loathing, and fear with which Mr. Utterson regarded him. "There must be something else," said the perplexed gentleman. "There is something more, if I could find a name for it. God bless me, the man seems hardly human, something troglodytic or a failed experiment in post-humanism. Oh, my poor old Harry Jekyll, if ever I read Satan's signature upon a face, it is on that of your new friend." Round the corner from the by-street, there was a square of ancient, handsome corporate housing, now mostly divided into high-end apartments. One house, the second from the corner, was still occupied entire under the name of Dr. Henry Jekyll. Utterson approached the main entrance, a grand facade of polished stone and smart glass that contrasted sharply with the grim back door he had just left. He pressed his thumb to the biometric scanner. The door slid open instantly, revealing Poole, Jekyll's advanced android majordomo. Poole was a model of sleek, unobtrusive service, his synthetic features molded into eternal, polite neutrality. "Is Dr. Jekyll at home, Poole?" asked the lawyer. "He is not, Mr. Utterson," replied the android, his voice a smooth baritone. "The doctor has gone into deep focus mode in the laboratory. He left explicit instructions not to be disturbed. I just saw Mr. Hyde go in by the old dissecting room door, Poole," Utterson said, watching the android's optical sensors closely. "Is that right, when Dr. Jekyll is not in?" "Quite right, Mr. Utterson, sir," replied the servant. "Mr. Hyde has full admin-level clearance to all sectors of the doctor's facility. We have orders to obey him as we would Dr. Jekyll himself." Utterson felt his stomach drop. "I do not think I have ever met Mr. Hyde here." "Oh, dear no, sir. He never streams in the main house," replied the android. "He is an analog presence, sir. We see very little of him on this side of the building. He mostly comes and goes by the laboratory." "Well, good night, Poole." "Good night, Mr. Utterson." The lawyer walked away with a heavy heart. The mystery had deepened. It was clear now that Hyde was not merely a protege, but a parasite planted deep within Jekyll's life. Poor Harry, Utterson thought, as the acid rain began to fall again. He is in deep waters. He was wild when he was young, a long while ago to be sure. But in the law of God, there is no statute of limitations. It must be that the ghost of some old sin, the cancer of some concealed disgrace, punishment coming years after memory has forgotten, and self-love condone the fault. And the lawyer, scared by the thought, brooded a while on his own past, groping in all the corners of memory, lest by chance some old file of his own might leap to light unabashed. But his fear was for his friend. He feared the glitch he had just seen. He feared the cold, dead eyes of Edward Hyde and what they might do if the tyrant should find out he was being hunted. Chapter 3. The Fatal Exception. Nearly a year later, in the month of October, Neo-London was startled by a crime of singular ferocity, rendered all the more notable by the high position of the victim. The details were few and startling, captured in 4K resolution by a passive surveillance drone. A young woman, a freelance data miner living alone in a micro-apartment overlooking the river sector, had positioned herself by the window to watch the city's holographic moon cycle. The air was clearer than usual, the acid rain having scrubbed the smog from the upper levels, and the lane below was lit by the soft, humming glow of sodium vapor lamps. It was roughly 11 o'clock when she noticed an elderly gentleman of distinguished appearance walking towards the bridge. He carried a secure data slate and moved with the analog grace of the pre-war generation. It was Sir Danvers Carew, a high-ranking member of the Bioethics Parliament. Advancing to meet him came another man, very small and plainly dressed. The witness recognized him instantly and felt a surge of nausea ripple through her neural implant. It was Mr. Hyde, who had once visited her sector for illicit supplies. Sir Danvers stopped and accosted the smaller man with a polite, old-world courtesy, perhaps asking his way. The moon shone on his face as he spoke. The witness described it as breathing an innocent and old-world kindness, yet with a certain high-resolution clarity of purpose. Suddenly, and without any warning from the threat detection algorithms, Mr. Hyde broke out in a flame of anger. He stamped his foot, brandishing a heavy walking stick, a rare, kinetic impact weapon made of reinforced carbon fiber and ironwood. He carried on, as the witness described, like a madman whose operating system had suffered a catastrophic error. The old gentleman took a step back, with the air of one very much surprised and a trifle hurt. And at that, Mr. Hyde broke all bounds and clubbed him to the earth. What followed was not a fight, but a deconstruction. With ape-like fury, he trampled his victim underfoot and hailed down a storm of blows, under which the bones were audibly shattered and the body jumped upon the roadway. The violence was so fast, so mechanically precise, yet chaotic, that it looked like a glitch in the video feed, a blur of motion that the frame rate could not capture. The witness, overcome by the sheer sensory overload of the brutality, fainted, her internal monitors triggering an emergency shutdown. It was 2 o'clock when she came to herself and called the private security forces. The murderer was gone long ago, but there lay his victim in the middle of the lane, incredibly mangled. The stick with which the deed had been done, although it was of some rare and very tough composite material, had broken in the middle under the stress of this insensate cruelty. One splintered half had rolled in the neighboring gutter. The other, without doubt, had been carried away by the murderer. A secure wallet and the data slate were found upon the victim. The wallet contained credit chips of immense value, but the slate contained no data, only a sealed physical envelope addressed, in case of death, to the name of Gabriel Utterson. This was brought to the lawyer the next morning, before he was out of bed, and he had no sooner seen it and been told the circumstances than he shot out a solemn lip. "I shall say nothing till I have seen the body," said he. "This may be very serious. Have the kindness to wait while I boot up." He hurried over his breakfast and drove with the security officer to the nearest precinct station, where the body had been carried. As soon as he came into the cell, he nodded. "Yes," said he, "I recognize him. I am sorry to say that this is Sir Danvers Carew." "Good God, sir," exclaimed the officer, "is it possible?" And the next moment his eye lighted up with professional ambition. "This will make a great deal of noise in the media feeds," he said, "and perhaps you can help us to the man." And he briefly narrated what the data miner had seen and showed the broken stick. Mr. Utterson had already quailed at the name of Hyde, but when the stick was laid before him, he could doubt no longer. Broken and battered as it was, he recognized it for one that he had himself presented many years before to Henry Jekyll. "Is this Mr. Hyde a person of small stature?" he inquired. "Particularly small and particularly wicked-looking is what the witness called him," said the officer. "If you will come with me in my vehicle," said Utterson, "I think I can take you to his server node. I mean his house." It was by this time about 9 in the morning, and the first fog of the season, a chocolate-colored pall of industrial exhaust, hung low upon the heavens. As the cab crawled from street to street, Mr. Utterson beheld a marvelous number of degrees and hues of twilight. For here, it would be dark like the back end of evening, and there would be a glow of a rich, lurid brown, like the light of some strange conflagration. And here, for a moment, the fog would be quite broken up, and a haggard shaft of daylight would glance in between the swirling wreaths. The dismal quarter of Soho, now a quarantine zone for failed augmentations and illicit tech, seen under these changing glimpses, with its muddy streets and its slatternly passengers and its lamps, which had never been extinguished or had been kindled afresh to combat this mournful reinvasion of darkness, seemed, in a lawyer's eyes, like a district of some city in a nightmare. They stopped before the address. It was the home of Henry Jekyll's favorite, the man who was heir to 250,000 credits. An ivory-faced and silvery-haired old woman opened the door. She had an evil face, smoothed by hypocrisy and cheap cosmetic surgery, but her manners were excellent. Yes, she said, this was Mr. Hyde's luxury unit, but he was not at home. He had been in that night very late, but had gone away again in less than an hour. There was nothing strange in that. His habits were very irregular, and he was often absent. For instance, it was nearly 2 months since she had seen him till yesterday. "Very well, then, we wish to see his rooms," said the lawyer. And when the woman began to declare it was impossible, "I had better tell you who this person is," he added. "This is Inspector Newcomen of the Corp SEC." A flash of odious joy appeared upon the woman's face. "Ah," said she, "he is in trouble. What has he done?" Mr. Utterson and the inspector exchanged glances. "He does not seem a very popular character," observed the latter. "And now, my good woman, just let me and this gentleman have a look about us." In the whole extent of the house, which but for the old woman remained otherwise empty, Mr. Hyde had only used a couple of rooms, but these were furnished with luxury and good taste. A closet was filled with wine. The picture of a bioengineered nude hung on the wall, a gift, as Utterson supposed, from Henry Jekyll, who was much of a connoisseur, and the carpets were of many plies and agreeable in color. At this moment, however, the rooms bore every mark of having been recently and hurriedly ransacked. Clothes lay about the floor, with their pockets inside out. Locked drawers stood open, and on the hearth there lay a pile of gray ashes, as though many papers had been burned. From these embers the inspector disinterred the butt end of a green check book, which had resisted the action of the fire. The other half of the stick was found behind the door, and as this clinched his suspicions, the officer declared himself delighted. A visit to the bank, where several thousand credits were lying to the murderer's credit, completed his gratification. "You may depend upon it, sir," he told Mr. Utterson. "I have him in my hand. He must have lost his head, or he never would have left the stick or, above all, burned the checkbook. Why, money's life to the man. We have nothing to do but wait for him at the bank and get out the wanted holographic posters." This, however, was not so easy to accomplish, for Mr. Hyde had few familiars. Even the master of the servant maid had only seen him twice. His family could nowhere be traced. He had never been photographed, and the few who could describe him differed widely, as common observers will. Only on one point were they agreed, and that was the haunting sense of unexpressed deformity, the feeling that the man was a corrupted file, incompatible with the rest of the human system, with which the fugitive impressed his beholders. Chapter 4. The Incident of the Encryption. It was late in the afternoon when Mr. Utterson found his way to Dr. Jekyll's door. He was admitted by Poole and led down through the kitchen and across a yard which had once been a garden, but was now paved with cooling vents and server exhaust ports, to the building which was indifferently known as the laboratory or the dissecting rooms. The doctor had bought the house from the heirs of a celebrated cybersurgeon, and his own tastes being chemical rather than anatomical, he had changed the destination of the block at the bottom of the garden. It was the first time that the lawyer had been received in that part of his friend's quarters, and he eyed the dingy, windowless structure with curiosity and gazed round with a distasteful sense of strangeness as he crossed the theater, once crowded with eager students and now lying gaunt and silent, the tables laden with chemical apparatus, the floors strewn with crates of fiber-optic cabling and litter of packing straw, and the light falling dimly through the foggy cupola. At the further end, a flight of stairs mounted to a door covered with red baize, and through this, Mr. Utterson was at last received into the doctor's private cabinet. It was a large room, fitted round with glass presses, furnished, among other things, with a cheval glass and a business table, and looking out upon the court by 3 dusty windows barred with iron. The fire burned in the grate. A lamp was set lighted on the chimney shelf, for even in the houses the fog began to lie thickly. And there, close up to the warmth, sat Dr. Jekyll, looking deathly sick. He did not rise to meet his visitor, but held out a cold hand and bade him welcome in a changed voice. "And now," said Mr. Utterson, as soon as Poole had left them, "you have heard the news?" The doctor shuddered. "They were crying it in the square," he said. "I heard them in my dining room." "One word," said the lawyer. "Carew is my client, but so are you, and I want to know what I am doing. You have not been mad enough to hide this fellow." "Utterson, I swear to God," cried the doctor, "I swear to God I will never set eyes on him again. I bind my honor to you that I am done with him in this world. It is all an end. And indeed he does not want my help. You do not know him as I do. He is safe. He is quite safe. Mark my words, he will never more be heard of." The lawyer listened gloomily. He did not like his friend's feverish manner. "You seem pretty sure of him," said he. "And for your sake, I hope you may be right. If it came to a trial, your name might appear." "I am quite sure of him," replied Jekyll. "I have ground for certainty that I cannot share with anyone. But there is one thing on which you may advise me. I have received a letter, and I am at a loss whether I should show it to the police. I should like to leave it in your hands, Utterson. You would judge wisely, I'm sure. I have so great a trust in you. You fear, I suppose, that it might lead to his detection?" "No," said the other. "I cannot say that I care what becomes of Hyde. I am quite done with him. I was thinking of my own character, which this hateful business has rather exposed." Utterson ruminated a while. He was surprised at his friend's selfishness, and yet relieved by it. "Well," said he at last, "let me see the letter." The letter was written in an odd, upright hand and signed Edward Hyde, and it signified, briefly enough, that the writer's benefactor, Dr. Jekyll, whom he had long so unworthily repaid for 1,000 generosities, need labor under no alarm for his safety, as he had means of escape on which he placed a sure dependence. "Have you the envelope?" asked Utterson. "I burned it," replied Jekyll, "before I thought what I was about. But it bore no postmark. The note was handed in." "Shall I keep this and sleep upon it?" asked Utterson. "I wish you to judge for me entirely," was the reply. "I have lost confidence in myself." "Well, I shall consider," returned the lawyer. "And now one word more. It was Hyde who dictated the terms in your will about that disappearance?" The doctor seemed seized with a qualm of faintness. He shut his mouth tight and nodded. "I knew it," said Utterson. "He meant to murder you. You have had a fine escape." "I have had what is far more to the purpose," returned the doctor solemnly. "I have had a lesson. Oh God, Utterson, what a lesson I have had!" And he covered his face for a moment with his hands. On his way out, the lawyer stopped and had a word or two with Poole. "By the by," said he, "there was a letter handed in today. What was the messenger like?" But Poole was positive nothing had come except by post, and only circulars by that, he added. This news sent off the visitor with his fears renewed. Plainly the letter had come by the laboratory door. Possibly, indeed, it had been written in the cabinet, and if that were so, it must be differently judged and handled with more caution. The analysis. On his way home, Utterson stopped at his office to consult with his head clerk, Mr. Guest. Guest was a man of intense curiosity and a specialist in forensic coding and digital handwriting analysis. There was no man from whom Utterson kept fewer secrets. "Guest," said he, laying the tablet with the digital letter before him, "this is a sad business about Sir Danvers." "Yes, sir, indeed. It has elicited a great deal of public feeling, said Guest. The man, of course, was mad. I should like to hear your views on that, replied Utterson. I have a document here in his hand. It is between ourselves, for I scarce know what to do about it. It is an ugly business at the best. But there it is, quite in your way, a murderer's autograph. Guest's eyes brightened, and he sat down at once and studied the code structure on the screen. No, sir, he said, not mad, but it is an odd hand, and by all accounts, a very odd writer, added the lawyer. Just then the servant entered with a note. Is that from Dr. Jekyll, sir? Inquired the clerk. I thought I knew the encryption header. Anything private, Mr. Utterson? Only an invitation to dinner. Why? Do you want to see it? One moment. I thank you, sir. The clerk laid the two digital files side by side on his monitor, running a comparison algorithm. His face was a study of concentration. Thank you, sir, he said at last, returning both files. It is a very interesting autograph. There can be no two opinions about that, said Utterson. Why? The code syntax is in many points identical, only differently compiled, said Guest. It is a rather singular resemblance. The variables are declared in the exact same manner, but the logic flow is inverted. Rather quaint, said Utterson. It is, as you say, rather quaint, returned Guest. I wouldn't speak of this note, you know, said the master. No, sir, said the clerk. I understand. But no sooner was Mr. Utterson alone that night than he locked the note into his safe, where it reposed from that time forward. What, he thought, Henry Jekyll forged for a murderer, and his blood ran cold in his veins. Chapter 5: The Incident of Dr. Lanyon. Time ran on. Thousands of credits were offered in reward, for the death of Sir Danvers was felt as a public blow to the stability of Neo-London. But Mr. Hyde had disappeared from the grid as if he had never existed. No digital footprint, no biometric trail. He had simply logged off. For 2 months, Dr. Jekyll was much of his old self. He came out of his seclusion, renewed relations with his friends, and became once more their familiar guest and entertainer in the high society corporate circles. His face seemed to open and brighten, as if with an inward consciousness of service. And for more than 2 months, the doctor was at peace. But on the 8th of January, Utterson dined with him, and on the 12th, and again on the 14th, the door was shut against the lawyer. The doctor is confined, said Poole through the intercom. Express orders. Personal quarantine protocol. On the 15th, Utterson tried to see Dr. Lanyon. There at least he was not denied admittance. But when he came in, he was shocked at the change which had taken place in the doctor's appearance. Lanyon had his death warrant written legibly upon his face. The rosy, healthy man had grown pale and flabby. His flesh seemed to have fallen away. He was visibly balder and older. But it was the look in his eye that terrified Utterson, a look of deep, unshakable terror, like that of a man who has seen the exposed core of a reactor. I have had a shock, said Lanyon, with a weak voice. I have had a systemic shock. My neurotransmitters will never recover. It is a question of weeks. Well, life has been pleasant. I liked it. Yes, sir, I used to like it. I sometimes think if we knew all, we should be more glad to disconnect. Jekyll is ill, too, observed Utterson. Have you seen him? Lanyon's face changed, and he held up a trembling hand, covered in medical monitoring electrodes. I wish to see or hear no more of Dr. Jekyll, he said in a loud, unsteady voice. I am quite done with that person, and I beg that you will spare me any allusion to one whom I regard as dead. We are 3 very old friends, Lanyon, said Utterson. We shall not live to make others. Nothing can change what I have seen, whispered Lanyon. There are things, Utterson, violations of nature that science was not meant to hack. Some day, after I am dead, you may perhaps come to learn the right and wrong of this. I cannot tell you. Lanyon kept his word. In less than a fortnight, his systems failed, and he died. The night after the funeral, at which he had been sadly affected, Utterson locked the door of his business room, and sitting there by the light of a melancholy halogen lamp, drew out a certified data packet addressed by the hand and sealed with the encryption key of his dead friend. Confidential, to be opened only by J.G. Utterson in case of the death of Henry Jekyll. Utterson broke the seal. Within there was another enclosure, likewise marked, not to be opened till the death or disappearance of Dr. Henry Jekyll. Utterson revolved the packet in his hand. Curiosity was a virus, trying to bypass his professional ethics. But he resisted. He stored the packet in the deepest sector of his private safe. The narrative of Dr. Lanyon, the decrypted log. The following is the content of the letter Utterson would eventually read. On the 9th of January, I received a digital missive from my old school companion, Henry Jekyll. It requested, with a desperation that bordered on madness, that I drive to his house, force the door of his cabinet, and retrieve a specific drawer containing certain chemical agents and a notebook. I was to take this drawer to my own consulting room and wait until midnight for a messenger. I did as requested. The drawer contained powders, a phial of blood-red liquid that fumed with a volatile ether, and a book of data logs recording a series of failed experiments. Dates and brief remarks like glitch detected or total failure were annotated next to them. At midnight, the messenger arrived. He was a small man, dressed in clothes that were too large for him, giving him the appearance of a scavenged android. As he entered, I was struck, as others have been, by a peculiar sensation of disgust. It was not merely his appearance, but a physical effect, a disruption of my own pulse, a feeling of incipient rigor, as if my biological systems were rejecting his proximity. "Have you got it?" he cried, his voice vibrating with a hunger that was almost withdrawal. "Have you got the drawer?" I pointed to it. He sprang to it, and then paused, and laid his hand upon his heart. I could hear his teeth grate with the convulsive action of his jaw, and his face was so ghastly to see that I grew alarmed for his life and reason. "Compose yourself," said I. He turned a dreadful smile to me, and as if with the decision of despair, plucked away the sheet of the drawer and unlocked the phial. He mixed the red liquid with a white powder. The mixture began to hiss and smoke. The color changed from red to a dark purple, and then, slowly, to a watery green. It looked like radioactive waste. "And now," said he, "to settle what remains. Will you be wise? Will you be guided? Will you suffer me to take this glass in my hand and go forth from your house without further parley? Or has the greed of curiosity too much command of you? Think before you answer, for it shall be done as you decide. As you decide, you shall be left as you were before, and neither richer nor wiser, unless the sense of service to a man in distress may be counted as a kind of riches of the soul. Or, if you shall so prefer to choose, a new province of knowledge and new avenues to fame and power shall be laid open to you, here, in this room, upon the instant, and your sight shall be blasted by a prodigy to stagger the unbelief of Satan." "Sir," said I, affecting a coolness that I was far from possessing, "you speak in riddles, and you will perhaps not wonder that I hear you with no very strong impression of belief. But I have gone too far in the way of inexplicable services to pause before I see the end." "It is well," replied the visitor. "Lanyon, you remember your vows. What follows is under the seal of our profession." He put the glass to his lips and drank at one gulp. A cry followed. He reeled, staggered, clutched at the table and held on, staring with injected eyes, gasping with open mouth. And as I looked there came, I thought, a change. He seemed to swell. His face became black, and the features seemed to melt and alter. And the next moment I had sprung to my feet and leaped back against the wall, my arm raised to shield me from that prodigy, my mind submerged in terror. "Oh, God!" I screamed, and "Oh, God!" again and again. For there before my eyes, pale and shaken, and half fainting and groping before him with his hands, like a man restored from death, there stood Henry Jekyll. What he told me in the next hour, I cannot bring my mind to set on paper. I saw what I saw, I heard what I heard, and my soul sickened at it. And yet now, when that sight has faded from my eyes, I ask myself if I believe it, and I cannot answer. My life is shaken to its roots. Sleep has left me. The deadliest terror sits by me at all hours of the day and night. I feel that my days are numbered, and that I must die, and yet I shall die incredulous. As for the moral turpitude that man unveiled to me, even with tears of penitence, I cannot, even in memory, dwell on it without a start of horror. I will say but one thing, utter son, and that, if you can bring your mind to credit it, will be sufficient. The creature who crept into my house that night was, on Jekyll's own confession, known by the name of Hyde and hunted for in every corner of the land as the murderer of Carew. Chapter 6. Final Protocol. The Last Night. Mr. Utterson was sitting by his fireside one evening after dinner when he was surprised by a priority override notification on his secure terminal. It was Poole, Dr. Jekyll's android majordomo. When Poole entered, Utterson was shocked. The android, usually a model of sleek, unwavering service, was exhibiting clear signs of systemic distress. His optical sensors were flickering erratically, and his vocal synthesizer held a tremor that sounded disturbingly human. "What is the matter, Poole?" asked the lawyer. "Are your logic stabilizers malfunctioning?" "Mr. Utterson," said the android, "there is something wrong. Take a seat, and here's a glass of wine for you," said the lawyer. "Now, take your time, and tell me plainly what you want." "You know the doctor's ways, sir," replied Poole, ignoring the wine, "and how he shuts himself up. Well, he's shut up again in the cabinet, and I don't like it, sir. I wish I may die if I like it. Mr. Utterson, sir, I am afraid." "Now, my good android," said the lawyer, "be explicit. What are you afraid of?" "I've been afraid for about a week," said Poole, his voice dropping to a static whisper, "and I can bear it no more." The android's distress was contagious. Utterson put on his armored coat without another word, and they went out into the night. It was a wild, dystopian night. A biting wind, heavy with particulate matter, blew through the steel canyons of Neo-London, whipping the rain against the neon signs until the city seemed a blur of streaked light. The wind made talking difficult and gave Utterson a premonition of systemic collapse. When they reached the square where Jekyll lived, the house was dark, save for the fanlight above the main door. Poole applied his thumb to the scanner, and the door slid open. The hall within was brightly lighted. A high-end holographic fireplace was burning, and about the hearth the whole of the servants, human and mechanical alike, were huddled together like a flock of frightened sheep. At the sight of Mr. Utterson, the housemaid broke into hysterical sobbing, and the cook cried out, "Bless God, it's Mr. Utterson," and ran forward as if to take him in her arms. What?" said the lawyer. "Are you all here? This is very irregular, very unoptimized behavior." "They are all afraid," said Poole. Then he signaled for silence. "Now, sir, you come as gently as you can. I want you to hear, and I don't want you to be heard. And see here, sir, if by any chance he was to ask you in, don't go." Utterson's heart gave a jump, but he followed the android through the maze of corridors and out into the rain-lashed yard that led to the laboratory building. They mounted the stair to the red baize door. Poole motioned for Utterson to stand on one side and listen. Then, with an obvious effort, he activated the intercom. "Mr. Utterson is here, sir, and wants to see you," said the android. A voice answered from within. It was a voice that made Utterson's blood run cold. Not because it was loud, but because it was wrong. It sounded synthesized, guttural, heavy with static and desperation. "Tell him I cannot see anyone," said the voice. "Thank you, sir," said Poole, deactivating the comms. He led Utterson back across the yard and into the main kitchen. "Sir," said the android, looking Utterson squarely in the eyes with his glowing optics, "was that my master's voice?" "It seems much changed," replied the lawyer, pale to the lips. "Changed? Well, yes, I think so," said the butler. "Have I been 20 years in this man's service, to be deceived by his voice pattern? No, sir. My master was deleted 8 days ago, when we heard him cry out to God. And who's in there instead of him, and why it stays there, is a thing that cries to heaven. This is a very strange tale, Poole. This is a rather wild tale, my machine friend," said Mr. Utterson, biting his finger. "Suppose it were as you suppose. Why should this usurper stay? What does it want?" "Sir, it is crying for chemicals," said Poole. "It is the only thing that comes out of that door, digital requisitions for chemical precursors. All week long, I have been running all over the black market to every illicit farm runner in the sector, hunting for a specific experimental reagent. I bring it back, I leave it outside the door. A few hours later, there's another order on my terminal, desperate, saying the last batch was impure and that I must find the original synth load. It is frantic, sir. Have you seen it? Once, said Poole. I came suddenly into the theater from Garden. It had come out to look for something, perhaps. It was digging among the crates of fiber optics. It looked up when I came in, gave a kind of glitching cry, and whipped upstairs into the cabinet. It was for 1 minute that I saw it, but my processors are still running the image. Sir, if that was my master, why had he a mask upon his face? If it was my master, why did he cry out like a rat and run from me? I have served him long enough. And then, the android paused, his system seeming to shudder. That thing was not Dr. Jekyll, sir. It was small. It moved wrong. It was like looking at a corrupted file, walking in 3 dimensions. Poole, said Utterson, there is something profoundly illegal going on here. It is my duty to break down that door. Ah, Mr. Utterson, that's talking, cried the android. The door is highly secured biometric steel, observed the lawyer. How are we to do it? I have a high-impact industrial breaching tool in the maintenance bay, said Poole. They retrieved the tool, a heavy thermal lance designed for cutting through starship bulkheads. They returned to the yard. The wind was still howling, but the laboratory was silent. Utterson hailed the door once more. Jekyll, he cried loudly, I demand to see you. He waited a moment, then gave fair warning. If you do not open to the biometric scan, I shall use force. Utterson, said the voice, and now the lawyer knew it was the voice of Hyde, thin, reedy, and vicious. For God's sake, have mercy. Ah, that's not Jekyll's voice. It's the glitch, cried Utterson. Breach the door, Poole. Poole activated the thermal lance. A blinding white light flared as the tip melted into the steel hinges. The door groaned, metal screaming against heat. It took 3 sustained burns, the lance whining with power, before the locks melted into slag. With a final, unified shove by man and machine, the red baize door crashed inwards onto the carpet. The besiegers, appalled by their own violence and the stillness that followed, stood back and peered in. The cabinet was quiet. The holographic fire was still burning. A lamp was singing thinly on the table. Papers were neatly set forth on the business table, and near the fire, the things laid out for tea. The quietest room, you would have said, in Neo-London. But right in the middle of the floor, there lay the body of a man, sorely contorted and still twitching slightly. They drew near on tiptoe, turned it on its back, and beheld the face of Edward Hyde. He was dressed in clothes far too large for him, clothes of the doctor's bigness. The fibers of his expensive smart suit hung loose on his shrunken frame. In his hand, he clutched a shattered glass vial, which smelled strongly of bitter almonds, a cyanide capsule, the ultimate system crash. He has terminated his own process, said Utterson solemnly. We have come too late whether to save or punish. Hyde is gone to his account, and it only remains for us to find the body of your master. They searched the entire laboratory building. They checked the server racks, the chemical storage bays, even the exhaust vents. Nowhere was there any trace of Henry Jekyll, dead or alive. Finally, they returned to the cabinet. On the business table, Utterson found a large data slate containing several files. The first was a will, drawn in the same eccentric terms as the one he had returned 6 months before, to serve as a testament in case of death and as a deed of gift in case of disappearance. But in place of the name of Edward Hyde, the lawyer, with indescribable amazement, read the name of Gabriel John Utterson. The second was a short digital note in the doctor's hand. Utterson read it with a sudden sinking of the heart. My dear Utterson, when this shall fall into your hands, I shall have disappeared. Under what circumstances I have not the penetration to foresee, but my instinct and all the circumstances of my nameless situation tell me that the end is sure and must be early. Go then, and read the narrative which Lanyon warned me he was to place in your hands. And if you care to hear more, access the encrypted file on this slate labeled Confession. Cool, said Utterson, pocketing the data slate. I will go home to read these documents in quiet, but I shall be back before midnight, when we shall send for the authorities. They went out, locking the door of the laboratory behind them, leaving the dead glitch lying among the high-tech ruin of its creator's dreams. Chapter 7. The Root Access Log, Henry Jekyll's Confession. Decrypting file, 100% complete. Author, H. Jekyll, admin. Subject, error report and final statement. I was born in the year 20XX, heir to a great corporate fortune, endowed with excellent cognitive implants, and inclined by nature to industry and progress. Everyone who saw me in the high-tier towers guaranteed me an honorable and distinguished future. And indeed, the worst of my faults was merely a cheerful impatience, a desire to experience the sensory pleasures that the rigidity of my social class forbade. So, early on, I concealed my pleasures. I created a firewall between my public life, the brilliant scientist, the austere philanthropist, and my private desires. Over time, I realized that this duplicity was not mine alone. It was the fundamental condition of modern man. Man is not truly one, but two. He is the user, the moral conscience, the social facade, and the avatar, the impulses, the hunger, the violence. And I, as a man of science, decided that if these two identities could be separated, life would be relieved of all that is unbearable. The unjust could go his way, delivering crimes without remorse. The just could walk steadfastly on his virtuous path, untempted by the flaws of his dark twin. I did not want to destroy man. I wanted to debug him. I wanted to refactor the code of the human soul. The compilation, I acquired the chemical precursors on the black market and programmed the dissociative nanobots. On that fateful night, I watched the mixture fume in the test tube, turning from red to toxic green. I drank it. The pain was atrocious. I felt as if my bones were being ground by gears, a deadly nausea and a horror of the spirit that cannot be exceeded at the hour of birth or death. Then the agony subsided. I felt something new. I felt younger, lighter, happier in my body. I felt an intoxicating freedom, a mental recklessness. I knew, in that moment, that I was no longer Henry Jekyll. I ran to the mirror. There he was, Edward Hyde. He was smaller, stockier. Why? Because the evil side of my nature was less developed, less exercised than the good side. Jekyll was a complex construction of years of study and effort. Hyde was pure instinct. He was a glitch in the human matrix. Everyone who looked at him felt repulsion, for they saw in him the deformity of pure evil without the mask of civilization. But I did not feel repulsion. I felt a welcome. I was looking at myself. The infinite loop. You know the rest? Utterson. The crimes. The freedom. I, Jekyll, could wake up in the morning with a clean conscience, while Hyde had spent the night beating innocents in the streets of the low tier. I was the first man in history to commit crimes and, with a simple antidote, make the culprit vanish like smoke. But the code began to fail. The first time was spontaneous. I went to sleep as Jekyll in my secure bed and woke up seeing the hairy, scarred hand of Hyde on the sheets. Terror consumed me. Hyde's software was overriding Jekyll's operating system. I was losing administrator control. I tried to stop. For 2 months, I was virtuous. But the addiction to freedom is the strongest of all. In a moment of weakness, I took the serum again. And this time, the demon came out roaring, furious at having been caged. It was on that night that I killed Sir Danvers Carew. That act of violence was not planned. It was a buffer overflow, a release of accumulated kinetic energy. The fatal error. Now we come to the end. The cause of the disaster was not moral. It was technical. The original batch of the chemical salt I used in the first experiment was impure. There was some unknown trace, some rare contaminant in those old chemical reserves that was, in fact, the crucial active ingredient. When my stock ran out, I ordered more. The new product was chemically pure, and therefore useless. I have spent this last week screaming for Poole, sending him to every pharmacy in Neo-London. In vain. The mixture does not work. I am trapped. The last effective dose dissipated hours ago. I am writing this with Jekyll's hand, but I feel the change coming. I feel the itch under the skin, the clicking of joints. Hyde is returning, and this time it will be permanent. Jekyll will die, and what remains will be only the monster, cornered in this room, howling with fear of the gallows. In a moment, my handwriting will change. My mind will fragment. Utterson, when you read this, Henry Jekyll will no longer exist. What you find on the floor, holding the cyanide vial, will not be me. It will be the other. Will he kill himself? I do not know. Hyde loves life with an animal intensity, and he fears death more than anything. But he knows the door will give way. The door is shaking. I hear the hum of Poole's thermal lance. It is the end. I will close the file now. I will disconnect. Goodbye. Connection terminated. System offline. With this, we conclude the adaptation of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde into the cyberpunk universe. This version maintained the soul of the original tragedy, the idea that technology, whether chemical or digital, does not create new demons. It merely releases those that already live within us. Jekyll believed he could use technology to become pure. Hyde proved that purity without morality is merely chaos. Utterson and Lanyon represent society attempting to process this new reality, failing to comprehend that the monster did not come from outside, but from within. And that's how this video ends too. Thanks for watching. See you next time.